My name's Sally Wilson. I am the lead solution consultant for public sector here at Zscaler within the UK and I. I'm here today to talk to you about the risks associated with generative AI tools, what that means for public sector organisations, and how it is that we can better implement Zscaler's tools to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from the risks associated with them. So let's start there then. What are the risks with generative AI? We've got to think about generative AI as both a friend and an enemy. It's a friend, it's a productivity tool. It's going to make us better at our jobs, more efficient at our jobs. Why on earth would we not want to use it? But also, we don't know what we don't know about generative AI. It is also the enemy. How is it that we can perceive the information that we're putting into these tools today will not necessarily be used against us in anger at a later date? So the risks associated with both generative AI being a friend and an enemy, let's call it the frenemy. So what are the risks associated with that? Let's think about data leakage as being the first area that we need to consider when we're governing and applying policy against our users when they're trying to access generative AI. If we've potentially got users inputting sensitive data or information, which eventually will make its way into, the hands of somebody we don't necessarily want it to, then how is it that we can put the tools in place to sit across that and make automatic decisions based upon what a user is inputting? The next thing, compliance. As public sector organisations, we have a duty of care to align ourselves with the principles and frameworks which govern across compliance. Think about GDPR. How is it that we need to implement tools to make GDPR something that we're aligning ourselves to specifically and not in anger? And last but not least, cybersecurity. We know today that most of the threats that we see on the internet are either driven through generative AI, whether they're sophisticated and or not. We have to fight fire with fire. If we're not using generative AI tool as a combative position against generative AI-driven cyber threats, then we're simply not going to be putting enough blocks in place. So, as our individual users are trying to access generative AI tools, for the purposes of productivity, of course, what is it that needs to sit in the middle as a broker or security tool to make sure that all of the risks associated are not exposable assets to our organisation? This is where Zscaler comes in. Zscaler's Zero Trust Exchange is a cloud-native platform that is sitting directly in between our users and the generative AI tools that they're trying to access today. One of the key and core principles of Zscaler Zero Trust Exchange is data leakage prevention. We're using tools such as optical character recognition to know and understand exactly the prompts that a user is putting into these generative AI tools and make sure that they don't contain anything that's sensitive, critical to either an individual's identity or our individual organisation's sensitive and integrity of data. DLP is something that must be implemented, especially if we're wanting to sanction and allow Gen AI tools today. The next thing we need to do is align ourselves to a zero trust architecture. My users should not be an exposable asset to the public internet. We need to use the principle of inside-out connections as a user is connecting to a secure brokering service or zero trust exchange that's sitting in between them and the generative AI tools that they're trying to access for the purposes of productivity. We also need to monitor everything that individual user is doing to make sure that there is nothing critical being exposed to the internet, that also we're aligning ourselves to the principles of compliance and GDPR, which brings me on to the final point. What tools do we have in place that automate the alignment to specific frameworks such as GDPR? How can we utilise the dashboard views that we're monitoring within the Zero Trust Exchange to ensure that GDPR is something that is just a mainstay? It's not something that we have to implement in anger. It's something that is an easy thing for us to consider and implement policy against as well. So let's take a real-world scenario and play this one out. This user down here is trying to connect to ChatGPT, to maybe rewrite a compliance document internally. This individual user says, ChatGPT, help me out with this. How can I make this more robust? How can I make it more succinct as a policy? User inputs the information into ChatGPT, but in the middle we've got the Zero Trust Exchange, which is knowing, actually, using optical character recognition, is there anything that I'm not necessarily going to want to share with a tool that I don't necessarily trust? We're going to revoke that information. The Zero Trust architecture means that my user is not an exposable asset to the internet. We're implementing the rules of Zero Trust, which is absolutely everything that we should be doing to align ourselves to cybersecurity, especially when we think about the fact that most threats are driven by Gen AI tools today. All while we're doing that, we're monitoring that individual's user's traffic. We're continuously adapting our policy based upon the DLP rules that we've got in place and also the Zero Trust architecture decision-making criteria that we're using to implement policy as well. Last but not least, we're making sure that all of this is aligned by an overarching view of GDPR as being our compliance mechanism for implementing policy and aligning ourselves specifically to what it is that's important to our organisation as we adapt ourselves in line with the government policy as well. Users inputting this information into ChatGPT, we're governing across that individually on all of these sections here, and only when we see a transaction that is not in line with what it is that we're governing across, will we apply block rules. What that means is a user can interact with the productivity tools that they want to. They're being more productive within their roles. They're able to do their jobs in a more efficient manner. But what we're not doing is exposing our users as individual cyber threat risks, giving them tools that will make sure that they're not sharing anything that's potentially sensitive or critical to our organisation, monitoring and aligning to those principles as well as we do so. That's how we best implement ourselves and allow our users to interact with these generative AI tools today without exposing our users to any of these risks associated. Thank you so much for listening to me today, guys. I've been Sally Wilson. We've been through Generative AI tool. If you need any more information, then please reach out to your Zscaler account team or check out our website for more information.